Welcome back to this episode of the Getting Shit Done podcast with myself, Will Pringle, and my co-host, Harry Tarbuck. Today we have a guest, John Powell, Managing Director of Frankham Risk Management, who's a chartered building surveyor with 30 years experience in the industry, running his business for 20 plus years. John, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Let's kick it off with, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here today.
One, you invited me to come to this podcast. You mentioned I'm a chartered building surveyor. I've been in the industry for, I suppose, too many years now, and I've worked in large corporates as well as starting up my own business back in 2004, and have developed a really successful compliance business.
So 21 years ago, you set up Frankham Risk Management. What got you there? Talk about the early days before that. I was working for, initially my career started in central government with the Property Service Agency, part of the Department of the Environment. And I was working on a lot of the Crown Estate, on some very iconic buildings. And that's where I sort of learned my trade. Then when Margaret Thatcher decided that she wanted to start cutting costs and downsizing a lot of the civil servants, she outsourced us. And I went across to what was then known as Tarmac. And then that got rebadged into becoming Tarmac Services, and then became Carillion, and then Carillion Services. And I think we all know what happened with Carillion, of course.
Datterley. But that was over 20 odd years ago that I was with them. I then decided to go freelance. There was an opportunity for me to exit Carillion. The signs were already on the wall that things weren't quite right at Carillion. So there was an opportunity for me to move away. So I'd done my sort of large corporate bit and set up on my own. And then there was an opportune meeting with what is now is an old university colleague of mine who's now at the managing director of the group at Frankham. And we got talking about this subject around compliance. I had a very strong interest in that. We was dealing with quite a lot of compliance issues in Carillion. And I was managing the Met Police contracts, and I was managing Royal Park contracts, a lot of the MOD contracts. And there was a lot of compliance issues in there. And compliance wasn't really being managed that well. So I spoke to my colleague about it. He introduced me to the chairman of Frankham. And then over a few coffees and a few meetings, we decided to set up Frankham Risk Management, which is what I set up 21 years ago.
And it's an industry, I don't think a lot of people, unless you're in the construction built environment industry, will understand. So when you were younger and you were sort of coming through school and university, was it an industry you aspired to be in, or how did you come across it? How did you find it?
Well, interestingly, that wasn't ever discussed at school. In fact, my education at school was a little bit sketchy, if I'm honest.
How so?
School was never something that really interested me. And I think the school I went to also, the teachers weren't particularly interested in the students. So I was sort of considered to be one of those individuals that probably wasn't going to succeed much in life. So we was pretty much put into those classes of those kids that were labelled already as that, they're going to be a waste of time. So, but I was inspired by one of my teachers, a gentleman by the name of Norman Addis, and he saw some potential in me in terms of woodwork. So we went into a woodwork class, and I had a bit of a flair for woodwork, not that I knew at the time. And he just brought that out in me, and he inspired me and encouraged me to do the best that I could in terms of carpentry. So much so that when I left school, he managed to find me an apprenticeship, and I did my sitting guilds, I did my advanced craft, and that's when I actually discovered the love for education. And
So I then continued to study in terms of higher national certificates, and then I went into a conversion year into building management, and then continued that into doing my degree, then becoming chartered. So it all stemmed from my school teacher, who effectively took an interest in me and inspired me to do well. And he always said to me, never take what somebody says to you. If they say that you're not capable of doing something, use that as a means to drive yourself forward, to prove them wrong. And that's pretty much what I've done for the rest of my career.
I think I've heard that sort of similar story a few times with people. The more people I meet in industry or at any sort of event, the most successful people I meet tend to maybe struggled at school or didn't fit in at school or it didn't interest them. But then you find a passion maybe outside of the general sort of school curriculum, and then you realise that there's so much more to the world than the basic sort of maths, English, physics, GCSEs and A-levels that we get taught have been pushed down. But yeah, I think across the board, that seems to be a little bit of a trend. So from there, how did you evolve to sort of setting up the business, and what's been sort of most important about the sort of early stages of running your own company?
I say compliance was always something that I felt that there was a need for better management and better control of it. All of the work that I was doing in Carillion really highlighted to me that compliance wasn't being managed particularly well. And in fact, even with new build construction, what was actually being handed over to the occupiers, the quality of that build work wasn't that great. And I could see that there would be, over time, a real drive around compliance to ensure that we had better management control of that. So I had this interest when I left Carillion to want to focus in that area. So being a chartered surveyor, having worked on a number of historic buildings, doing a lot of building pathology, I understood the issues that we had in our industry, and I wanted to see if we could, or I could, assist in addressing some of those. Meeting Steve Frankham and my colleague Richard that I went to university with, having discussed it with them, they could see that potential as well. And at that time, once we agreed to set up the company, I effectively chose that route because Frankham was already an established business. At that time, they'd been going for 20 years, had a large client base, all within the industry that I wanted to influence. And it gave me a platform to be able to go and have a good conversation with those clients. Interestingly, around that time when I went in to see those clients, a lot of them, pretty much all of them, to be fair, had this view that they had compliance under control. There was always someone in their organisation that was dealing with this stuff, and it was all okay. But I knew that there would be a time when they would realise that it's not being as managed as well as they thought. And it sadly takes an incident or two for that to happen. So in 2009, we had the Lacanau fire, and there were a number of fatalities there. And that identified that compliance wasn't being managed properly. That actually was part of, or a stimulus for part of my business to actually increase in terms of activity, because overnight we was getting phone calls from a lot of local authorities, housing associations that hadn't been carried out risk assessments on their buildings, that suddenly they needed to get this done. And a lot of them got named and shamed by the BBC for failing to carry out these assessments. So there was one example of where our industry wasn't really getting to grips with compliance issues. And obviously recently we've had, when I say recently, in 2017, we had the tragic event at Grenfell. And that, again, was another stimulus to identify that, compliance is not being managed by our industry at all.
Of course. And was it always the plan to scale it to where it is today?
I always knew that the business had the potential to grow. But if I'm honest, it was about incremental growth and to do it in steps. So effectively, I was using legislation and changes in legislation as the vehicle to grow my business. So going back to 2004, there was a piece of legislation that had already been enacted, which was the control of asbestos regulations in 2002, which came into effect in 2004 when I started my business. So that, for me, was a vehicle to actually go and speak to all of these clients that the Frankham Group had, to talk to them about that legislation and what that meant and the impact of that on them as businesses. And very quickly, that started to generate some revenue, which enabled me then to build out a successful asbestos business. And then once that model was working, I then just used other emerging legislation that was coming to market as a means of looking at other product services, fire safety, sort of water management, electrical management, gas safety, general health and safety. And that has actually stimulated quite a lot of activity. So the business has grown pretty much incrementally on that basis.
Okay, very interesting.
Obviously, with that having taken over 20 years, what's kind of something that you've learned from those 2 decades of running the business taught you that you wouldn't be able to do in a couple of years, sort of trying to scale quickly?
Okay, yeah. Obviously, scaling quickly can bring a lot of risk, particularly in terms of ensuring that you're delivering the promise in terms of the services that you're offering. I've seen a lot of businesses that try to run too quickly, and they sort of trip over themselves because they just build a team of people that haven't developed or put in place the right building blocks for the business to succeed. And then reputationally, they start to get damaged because they're not delivering the service that they'd promised to their clients. One of the key drivers for me to align myself with a company like Frankham was they already had established building blocks in place. They had a very, very successful business model. They had a wide client base, and therefore I could capitalize on using that client base. I could just take my products and my services and I could utilize the framework that they already had in place. There are things like finances and HR and all the policies and procedures and control schemes that you need in place, all the accreditations that you need to be able to compete in the marketplace. The Frankham Group already had these and had them in abundance. And I could simply ride on the back of those to enable me to break into new market sectors and use the covenant as well that they had as a very established business, a multi-million-pound consultancy practice. It meant that my business could compete in much stronger areas rather than being a single business that was trying to run too fast and then sort of fall over myself. It took a lot of the stress out of what a lot of new business, new startups take with, and it enabled me to focus on building the business constructively.
Amazing. And were there any moments along that journey where you thought, I just want to go back to doing a normal 9 to 5? Any real moments that come to mind?
Yeah, every business has its peaks and troughs, and it will be true to say that over the 21 years that we've had some downsides as well as upsides, and there have been times when, as the business has grown, and I look at I wake up in the morning and I think about how much revenue I've got to generate in the next 24 hours just to pay the salary bill and all the other associated costs. However, from the first time or the first moment that I employed the first individual that joined my business, I had this immense sense of responsibility that this was no longer just about me. It was about the people that I had invited to come and join my company. And more people that came and that I invited to join, the bigger that responsibility became. And so it's not something that I could easily just walk away from. They'd entrusted their livelihoods with me. They had families and mortgages and what have you. And I therefore had a responsibility to ensure that we could continue and build a successful business. And so, there were some down times, but you just ride those. You ride those waves and build a bigger and stronger business.
Were there any periods where you did scale a bit too quickly, or do you feel like you managed that risk very well?
I think looking back over the periods, I came up with an idea with an associate friend of mine where we thought that the compliance market needed some software. The managing compliance is problematic for a lot of organisations. The systems that they use are varied, and so to get some visibility of where the risk profiles are in property often requires them to pull data from lots of different sources to pull it all together to get a picture. So we decided, or I encouraged Steve Frankham to invest in building our own software because for me there was a big gap in the market. And in fairness to Steve, being the entrepreneur he is and the belief that he had in me, he agreed that we should go ahead and do that. And we invested circa £250,000 in software.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
Software, is it?
And a marketing team as well, and salespeople that we thought would be great. The downside with that whilst it was a good idea at the time, was that we was just going through the financial crash, and every time we went in to go on try to pitch software to an organisation, the finance director in each of those organisations was saying, we're not spending any more money on software. We've got enough software in our organisation, we don't need to buy more. So they were really cutting down, tying up on costs. So it meant it was a real struggle then for us to effectively get that software into different organisations. And we carried that debt for quite some time within the business. We've now cleared that debt. But it's important to recognise that sometimes you can't measure the success of that software. We're still using that software today. It's still very successful for our business, but it's become more of a piece of enabling software to support the rest of the business, rather than us effectively trying to place it in client organisations.
So would you be, the end user for that would be one of your clients, not a competitor? It would be a client that would be...
Yes, correct.
And then that would link up with how your business would operate more
indeed.
effectively?
Yeah.
Okay. Did anyone end up taking it on? Or?
Yeah, we've had a number of clients that have utilised the system, and that they're still using it to this day. In fact, it's getting more interest now because obviously compliance is high up there in terms of on their radar, and they're looking for systems that can assist them with managing that compliance. We're also interfacing that with some other software that we've created, which again is in relation to emerging legislation. So the tool has been a really good product for us. So when I look at the £250,000, and my chairman would always remind me to say, gosh, that was expensive. It costed £250,000. And I'd say to him, but there's been so many positive benefits in having that system, which you can't measure from. So when we're pitching for work through tenders, and they're asking, do you have some compliance software or a solution to assist us? we can put it into our bids. And that enables us then to secure that work. They may decide that ultimately they don't want to use it, or some of them do, but you can't measure then the fact, well, you've won that work on the basis that you've got that system, even though they're probably not adopting it personally. So for me, it's paid for itself time and time again. Software, as you know, needs to be continually updated. Codes change, and it can come out of date very, very quickly. We've got a team of people that support our technology, and we've been modifying that technology over time. And we tend to use the revenue streams that have come from those clients we've got to continue to develop that. The system continues to evolve. I've now got someone in-house who's constantly looking at data management, looking at how we can utilise our software to enable us to create efficiencies in the way we capture data, how we process the data. And that's all using the system that we developed sort of 15 years ago, which has been modified to help us with business process as well.
Oh, great.
Amazing. Whereabouts is the business at the moment in terms of headcount? And can you tell us a little bit about why those people that you've got in the team now are so important? And
okay. In terms of headcount, in my particular business, if I consider the fire engineering business as well, we're probably about 40 strong, but we're part of a wider group. So the Frankham consultancy group, we're about 220 staff. We operate our HQs in Sidcup in Bromley. We have an office in central London in Blackfriars, one in Stevenage, one in Oxford, and we've just opened an office in the Midlands in Birmingham. We've been pretty much a South-centric business for the last, we're looking at the group, last 43 years. But we've now decided that the timing's right for us to branch out to across the UK. We've been operating and supporting clients across the UK for many years, but most of our activity has been down in London and the South. But there's a lot of investment that's going into the Midlands between now and 2040, which aligns perfectly with our business models. So it's just right for us that we should position ourselves there to take advantage of that and support all of those clients. And we've been securing some very, very successful business of late in those areas. So in terms of the people, we are in the service sector. So we don't manufacture anything. It's all about people. So they are absolutely key to us. And it's essential that we build a team with people that are like-minded and they support the same culture that we have. Our culture is embedded by our 6 values, which is safety and well-being, in terms of integrity, in terms of innovation, it's in terms of respect, it's in terms of impeccable service, and it's in terms of teamwork. So that all of the values are people-centric, and it's important that everything that we do aligns with those business values, and those particular values spell out the word spirit. So we call that the Frankham spirit, and that's what drives our business. The people that I employ and the people I get my teams to employ, I'm very strong about trying to encourage them to employ people that are either as good as or better than we are, because in doing so, we effectively raise the bar of the business, and through that in itself, by default, the business grows and the business becomes successful. So they're absolutely key to get the right people on board with the same values, the same culture, the same drive, to want to take the business forward.
And when we were chatting, we met on the Wacky Races, and we were having which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later on. And you told me about a couple of success stories of individuals within your business. Anthony being one who's now running a business with you, and there was another girl I think that has been in the business a long time, is now a leader of your company or in a senior management position. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you identify early stage talent?
If I can deal with Holly first, rather than Anthony. Holly's been with me, working with me, and you see I use the word working with rather than working for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important consideration, because everybody that works with me, they're part of my team. You know, I can't do it without them. And I'm not one of sort of hierarchy and this person has to report into that person. I mean, we've all got roles to play.
Sure.
But it's important that, you know, we work together rather than for. Holly, she started her life in Frankham in supporting the chairman working on events, doing event management. And she was only, you know, relatively young at the time. She was very capable, very talented. I didn't have much of an interface with her because she was working with the chairman and the senior management team. But there was a change in approach from about event management. The business decided it wasn't going to do as many of those, and so her job was put at risk. And she was heartbroken by it because she just loved the business, loved the culture. And so when I heard that she was at risk, I just brought her under my umbrella, and that must be 18 years ago now. And I just said to her, look, you know, come and work for me. You know, I could see in her all of the values and the traits that I needed to take my business forward. And at that time, my business was starting to get busy, and I needed an additional pair of hands. So she came on just to effectively help manage the office and just do you know, the general sort of office stuff that you need just to keep things going. And she was brilliant at it. But then as my business evolved and I needed someone else to deal with another piece of the jigsaw, I would ask Holly to pick it up. I say, you know, can you deal with this for me? And she would take it on board. Not once did she ever say no. She was always happy to take it on board and to deliver the outputs that I needed. And she had this talent of being able to understand exactly what it was that I was thinking, and she would translate that into a positive outcome. And it got to the point where I was involving Holly in pretty much every aspect of my business. And if there was an area or two that needed some troubleshooting, I'd send Holly in there just to go and sort it out. And she has become probably the most knowledgeable person in my business other than me. And I know that I could step away and the business will continue to run because Holly would know every aspect of my business. And I've purposely put her in every aspect of my business to enable her to gain that understanding. She's now on a journey where she's doing some legal training, where she's looking at you know, property law, contract law, and she's acting in the position of my business and commercial manager. So she's looking at contracts, and she's doing commercial negotiations with clients around contracts. She's renegotiating contracts for me, and she ensures that all of the financial controls within the business are being adhered to. And so she's now part of my management team. So she's an excellent star. Anthony, just another great talent that was in my business. And he was working with me within the fire business, which was, you know, very successful. And then we had the Grenfell incident. And pretty much overnight, there was a big demand for fire engineering. So a lot of the industry was looking for fire engineers. There's quite a shortage of that. Well, Anthony came from a fire engineering background, and he saw that there was an opportunity for him to effectively, go off and set up on his own. He had the potential, he had the drive to want to go and create something for himself. So he approached me and said, look, I'm thinking of leaving. And I sort of sat with him and, I celebrated the fact that he was keen to want to, do something different. And we looked at the options that was available. One of the options is that he just goes on his own, he starts up, he's a one-man band, and then he has to deal with all of the struggles of a startup. Well, I said to him, the other alternative is that we could set up another separate company within Frankham Risk Management, which focused on fire engineering, and that we could work together to build that out, of which, he could have equity to do that. So rather than losing Anthony, I supported and mentored him to set up his own company. Again, following a very similar model to what I did with Steve when we set up Frankham Risk Management, that Anthony could now use all of the building blocks that I'd put in place around Frankham Risk Management to be his launch pad to grow his business. And that business has just grown exponentially over the last few years. Primarily because of his drive and determination, with a bit of mentoring from me, but also with the support of the Frankham Group and the covenant that we got that's again enabled him to penetrate into markets that he would have otherwise not have done so, being just a small startup.
It's such a nice story to hear when you hear people that have been with you, and then when they go to leave, they're leaving purely for their own sort of future career growth, to the extent where they'd rather do it with you than against you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, come back to the people thing, we are a people business, and it's essential for me to get to understand what motivates the individuals within my business. Not everybody wants to be running their own business, or they don't want to be senior management, but they've all got their own personal motivations and aspirations that they want to achieve. And my role in Frankham now is to work with all of the people that have come into my business, to work with them to ensure that they realise their own potential, whatever that is. And so we have two yearly reviews where we sit with the individuals, where we talk about not just the business aspirations, but personal aspirations, and what do we need to do to get them to where they need to be. Again, come back to the point that if you invest in the people, you grow your people, the byproduct of that is that your business just grows, and you just get that talent that is really helping driving the positive outcomes that you need.
Amazing. And what kind of advice maybe would you give to somebody starting their own business, or kind of taking that next step and giving away equity and working out who's best to kind of take on ownership of the business?
Okay, the first thing that I would say is that you don't give away equity easily. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of corridor talking that goes on about, I want some skin in the game, and I want to have some ownership of this and that. And that's all fine and grand when you see the positives that come out of that, and you're getting the benefits from that. What a lot of people fail to realise, that it has its downsides as well. If you're an owner of a business, you take on all the risks associated with that. And so you've got equity in the business. When there is a downturn in activity, when you're having one of those troughs and cash is not good, you're struggling to get cash in the door, and you've got a payroll at the end of the month that you need to service, or you've got a VAT bill that you need to pay, and there might not be enough cash that's in the bank, and there's a call then on those who have equity to fund that shortfall, that's when it becomes not as attractive as they like to think it is. Yeah. So you've got to have the people with the right mindset, the right understanding of what equity really means, and all of the risks, both the positives and the negatives that are associated with that, before you decide that it's the right approach to do. Now, it was right with Anthony, but we discussed all of those dynamics. Again, you go off on your own, you carry the lion's share of all of those issues. Whereas if you're part of a group with other shareholders, you share the burden. And again, I benefited in the early days with Frankham, where, my business was being bankrolled by the Frankham group, because getting cash in wasn't always easy, but there was cash in the company that could support that. So, it comes down to a very careful discussion with those individuals. We're not close to the idea of talking about equity, but everyone needs to fully understand and appreciate what that means.
And from your perspective then, what advice would you give to somebody looking to maybe bring someone into their business and offer them equity with that fear of letting go and losing control?
I think in terms of losing control, or if there's a fear about losing control, firstly, my advice is, look, allow your senior management team to support and take your business forward. Don't worry too much about that. If you've got a concern about whether your senior management team can take control and you can step back, then you've probably got the wrong senior management team. So if you've got that concern, change some things. There's that saying, isn't it? If you want to change some things in your life, change some things in your life. Yeah, because you've got to be, at some point, we all need to think about our future and whether we exit. Yeah. And the older you get, the more you realise that you're not as infallible as you think that you are. So it's a case of putting those building blocks in place, making sure you've got succession planning, make sure that the people around you understand what your plan is, what your personal plan, what the plan is for the business, and what the plan is that you have for them. Yeah, and then if everybody understands that, and you've got the right people, then there should be no fear about stepping back, losing control, and allow those individuals. It's all around trust and the individuals that you employ.
Amazing. What is kind of next steps for the business? Where do you kind of see that going in the next 5-10 years?
Well, say the big drive at the minute for me over the next 3 years, so I tend to work to a 3-year plan, is our expansion into the Midlands. We've done quite a lot of research about what's happening in the Midlands, and there's been a recent growth paper that's been issued by the West Midlands Growth Company that talks about the investment that's going in that area, and it aligns perfectly with the business models that we've got. And that is quite an exciting move for my company. And Frankham Risk Management and Frankham, Robson Frankham, the fire engineering business, tend to be at the forefront of new initiatives because we do the initial investigation work. And so we've ventured into that space, and we know by going into that space there will be other revenue streams that will flow to the rest of the group. And we've already crystallised an opportunity in there only in the last week. We got a 2-year contract in there. We've already got other clients that we support within the Midlands. So it's right for us now to build that out. that in itself will create huge opportunity in terms of growth for the company. As a group, we're looking to nearly double the size of the business over the next sort of 5 years. And that's a big ask. But because we've got those building blocks in place and the market is there for us to explore, there's no reason why that can't be achieved. But it's being initially driven by my business within those areas. So we open up the office in April. We're already securing business in that area, so things are moving in the right direction. And it's a very, very exciting opportunity for us. So
you've got some huge goals, huge ambitions. You're people first, software, you're building yourself. You mentioned you got your own podcast as well, or the business has a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that and any particularly interesting guests that you've had on?
Yeah, when I say the business has a podcast, the business supports a podcast, which is labelled as an independent podcast, and it's called the Open Fire Podcast. And it is sort of led by two colleagues of mine, Tom Gilbert and David Calvert. David Calvert's my operations director. And it's been run now for the last couple of years, and Frankham Group have been supporting that. And it's, as its name suggests, it's around fire safety, but it's now sort of expanded more into building safety, which is obviously quite key at the moment with the introduction of the Building Safety Act. And the subject in itself addresses some of the issues that have flown out of the Grenfell tragedy back in 2017. And there's been a lot of legislation that's come out of that. There's been obviously a lot of government input to that as well. And we've had some very interesting speakers. We've had Dame Judith Hackett, who's been on the sofa with us. And we've had Peter Abs, who wrote the book recently, Show Me the Bodies. And there's been a recent Netflix documentary on that subject as well. We've had Sir Ken Knight, Sir Bob Neal, two of the some politicians and ministers at the time of when some of these issues came to fore. And the general subject area has been really, really interesting and engaging, and it provides a fantastic platform for our industry to get some learning about both government thinking in terms of why they brought this sort of legislation in place, some of the issues that came out of Grenfell, what we could have done better, some of the learning points, and also some of the approaches that are now being put in place to ensure that we don't have a reoccurrence of those sort of incidents. So it's a really quite jovial at times of what can be quite a very sensitive subject, but really informative, and it's getting a lot of traction.
I think that's what you have to do to keep people engaged. Otherwise, it's monotonous and no one wants to listen to it, right? So it's a good way of doing it.
Amazing. One thing that would be really helpful to know as well is how has your leadership changed over the past, throughout your career, really?
It's clearly had to adapt over time, but I suppose my leadership has evolved simply by observing the behaviours of others. I've come across a lot of characters across my career, and you pick up some of the things that seem to work and those that don't work. I've had some very authoritarian leaders that like banging the table, and they think that that's the way to motivate staff, and that doesn't really work for me. And you've got others that are shown a much more sort of empathetic and guiding and mentoring style, which is where my leadership sort of talents, I suppose, have honed. So, it's about observing what's happened over my career and then just adapting my style accordingly. I think my leadership style, I suppose you could define it as being one of empowering the teams that I build around me to make their own decisions, not to be dictatorial about what they should do and how they should do it, but give them the breadth to explore their own ideas about things. They will, touch base with me, they share with me their thought process, but ultimately I'll allow them to, go out and try different things. And there's no limitation for me in terms of what they can and what they can't do. Clearly, if there's a financial impact, they probably need to run it past me. But ultimately, there's some great talent with some great ideas. I don't have all the ideas, but there's a lot of people in my team and within my business that have got some really good ideas that can shape the business. I also allow them to fail. It's important for me to allow them to do something and fail. As long as they don't keep failing, doing the same thing, but by failing, they learn and they grow. And then through that, if that doesn't work, we try something else. And we keep trying things until we get it right. And for me, it's just about trust and allowing that. And interestingly, I've seen such positives that have come out of that, which reinforces to me that that's the right approach to take.
And how important is hard work, say early in career versus later on in career? Is there a period of time where you have to give it 100% and a period of your life where you've been able to sort of step back a bit and have some more time to yourself?
Getting balance is absolutely key. Yeah, clearly, when you're building a business, you're working generally long hours because there's a lot to do. And particularly if you're a small business, you're having to grapple with everything. When I was freelance, I was obviously delivering, having to secure the work. So you're pitching for the work, you secure the work, you're delivering the work, and then you've got all of the invoicing to do, and you've got all of the other documentation that you have to put in place, and you're doing anything and everything. As the business grows, you then start to put some people around you that start picking up all those things. So that gets a bit easier. But as you're growing the business, you've got more mouths to feed, so therefore you have to generate more volume to that. So it's a constant need to keep building and driving and pushing forward. So I suppose that there's been times where it seems like it's been really long, really hard work, and that you add it constantly. I don't tend to switch off in terms of business. I think as a business manager, and you're the same way when you run a business, you're constantly thinking about your business all the time. Even when you're on holiday, you're thinking about things. But over time you get to find a way to be able to relax and manage all of that as well. A lot of the work that I do, I don't see as work because I really enjoy it. And so it's just part of me, it's part of my life, it's part of my DNA. But it can be challenging, but you need to take some time out. And I found latterly, having a fantastic team around me, I can step back a little bit because I know that my team will just continue. I can go on holiday and I don't have to worry about the business. When I'm away, I'm probably strategically thinking about my next move.
As opposed to panicking.
As opposed to worrying about business as usual.
Which is a good position to be in. So what do you do to take your mind off work as much as you can if you do try and have a break?
Well, most of the people who know me know that I just love sailing. I love being on the ocean. I've developed that passion for many, many years now. I do a lot of, I have in the past a lot of racing, a lot of offshore racing, which can be quite challenging at times. But it is effectively it's my happy place when I'm at sea. And I'm just using, the wind, just the power us forward, then it's a beautiful place to be.
Whereabouts do you go sailing?
I tend to sail predominantly around the Solent area. That's my main playing ground. But in terms of my offshore racing campaigns, a lot around the Mediterranean. Also, I've raced in the Caribbean as well. And I've got a lot of friends that I've developed through that. So, yeah, it's good fun.
Good.
I mean, talking about racing, slightly different racing. Obviously, you guys met at the Wacky Races charity tour. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that was like and your experience with that?
Yeah, the Wacky Races was a blast. For those of us who love fast cars and who love a bit of sort of petrol heads, although we did have some electric cars on the trip, it was and to drive with like-minded people in convoy through some beautiful scenery and staying at some really lovely hotels. Why wouldn't you want to go and do that? It was great fun. But there was a serious point to it as well, the reason that we did it. The reason I wanted to go this year was because a very close friend of ours, which is Roy Parrish, he runs a charity in terms of raising funds for a syndrome called PAX1, which is a syndrome which creates sort of some disabilities in terms of intellectual capability, also creates some facial disfigurements, and it's quite a disabling syndrome. And sadly, Roy's daughter has that condition. And Roy has this vision of wanting to create a whole life village to effectively provide a place where those that have that syndrome or similar syndromes, it's not just PAX1, that those children that are affected by that, they have a place where they can be cared for when their parents pass, because some of these conditions are such that those individuals will need full-time care. And obviously there's a real concern for the parents of those that when they're no longer around, who's going to care for their children? And it's an incredibly emotional situation that a number of us that were on the race, we've all sort of signed up to wanting to support that charity. I mean, Roy's got a big ask in terms of trying to create this whole life village, but the network that we've got, and through the race, we're looking to improve the awareness of that syndrome and other like syndromes, to see if we can get some funding to build something of that nature to support those youngsters. So that was the primary drive. And to do that and have fun at the same time by driving fast cars and raise a lot of money, for me, it just ticks all the boxes.
Yeah, it was an incredible trip, and yeah, it's a moving story, and there's a lot to do still, but it's a great thing to be part of.
Yeah,
for sure. So I guess sort of just wrapping up then, what sort of advice would you give to somebody looking to get into your industry, and I guess pair that with looking to have a similar sort of career to yourself, where they can get to a position that you're in?
Right. Well, first and foremost, please do come and join our industry. There's a massive shortage in our industry of consultants and also contractors as well. Construction industry is not considered to be a particularly attractive industry to be in. I think a lot of our youngsters, they just want to be influencers, don't they? They want to be on, using technology, which is great, but our industry is so rewarding, and there are so many different pathways for individuals to realise their own potential, and we desperately need those to come in. You know, there's a real shortage in terms of youngsters coming in, and that potentially is going to create a problem for our industry going forward. In fact, there's a bit of a problem with it now in terms of resource. The advice would be, look, come and have a look, come and see what this industry can provide you. And there is no ceiling. If you've got the drive to want to be successful, you can achieve anything that you want to. And I suppose I'm a case in point. You know, started my career being classified by the teachers at school that I was going to be a complete waste of space and couldn't make anything of my career. Was spotted by one teacher at that school who had a different view, set me on a pathway, and that just inspired me then to go on achieve the sort of things I want to achieve. And yeah, I think there's got to be some intrinsic motivation to want to do it, but sometimes you do need some people to guide you. And I've been blessed throughout my career to have worked with a number of individuals that have shown me that pathway. And we've all got a different pathway, but there's no reason at all why you can't achieve what you want to. You really put your mind to it.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. Thank you.
Amazing. Have you got one kind of standout moment that's been maybe your proudest moment throughout your career?
I suppose there's probably not one moment as such, but what I'm mostly proud of is that I've created something from nothing. I've built an incredible team of people around me. I've provided a pathway for them to realise their own potential. And I've created a legacy that I'm going to be leaving for those who follow me.
Amazing.
Yeah, really good. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure.
And some great insights, brilliant story. It's been a pleasure having you. So
Yes.
thank you, John.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.